Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad to have you here today. My name is Cyndy McDonald, and this is my Friday Forum. It's a show that I produce either bi-monthly or as we have these wonderful guests available that can come and speak with you about topics that are of importance to you. I'm an educator, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a business coach, and I reside in Central California. So as you're logging in, please let us know your name and where you're located. And the topic today that we have is mind and movement. So let us know what your favorite movement is. And at the end, I'm going to share what the newest movement that I've started and that it's been so much fun. I'm so pleased and honored to welcome our guest for today, Brandon Slade. And Brandon and I have been speaking over the last few months. He's an expert in working with neurodivergent students. He especially has special expertise and affinity for students with ADHD. His many years of experience in as a special education teacher and has done a lot of research and collaborative research on how our brains work and the connections between what our brains do and movement. He's the founder of Untapped Learning, a program for students and educators, which is headquartered in my home grounds, Boulder, Colorado. I grew up about 20 miles from where Brandon is, and he's very familiar with my hometown of Boulder, Colorado, where the Colorado School of Mines is. And his program works with students, educators, and also remotely. So it's not just limited to Colorado. So welcome, Brandon. We're glad to have you here today.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. Well, I'm so grateful and thank you so much everyone for taking the time.
We're all educators and we're all working with students. So you can see we've got runners, we've got people in Houston. I love Valerie says her favorite movement is ballet. Carmen's dance, Nola dance, and that is my new movement. I went and took my very first dance class this last week. It was the Western two-step or the Western swing and the two-step. And I've never been able to dance. My husband had no rhythm at all, so we were never able to dance. So now I'm able to go and explore that part and I absolutely loved it. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I did love it. So that's my new favorite form of movement is trying that. So, Brenda, tell us a little bit about how you came to be an educator. What was your personal journey in becoming a special education teacher?
It's a great question. I don't even know if I have a good answer because I struggled in school so much. I always tell people I have the best type of ADHD. So I was diagnosed with hyperactive ADHD at 5 years old, and I had the type of ADHD where people specialists from the district would come in and like watch me. I was like flipping chairs and jumping on desks, and they're like, "What is wrong with this child?" Right? So I got all kinds of help, all kinds of assistance, and I have two hyperactive brothers like myself. So just kind of shows you what our family dynamic was like. And the reason I call it the best type of ADHD is because we do work with so many people, and a lot of them, from Golden, Colorado School of Mines, places like that, who they know something's up, but they've always been like so bright and so respectful that they just kind of has gone unnoticed throughout their life, and they're just catching on to it now and getting the help that they need. But yeah, so I always struggled in school, and my path is really hard, and I think the goal was just always to help provide an environment that maybe I didn't have growing up, or people like me didn't have. Just an alternative way to go about this and discipline your gift a little bit.
I can just imagine your mom with all these
Oh,
hyperactive
she's an anxious wreck. So we love her like crazy, but it was a busy household. And again, like growing up, I'm sure it was so brutally hard in school and for my teachers and for my parents. But I've never heard an adult say, "I wish I had less energy." So like my brothers and I, like growing up, like now that we have a path and a reason and a purpose to put this energy towards something, it's a tremendous gift. But man, it's a hard path, and it's hard on people around you for sure.
It is. It is. So how did that lead you into doing special education as a
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, the biggest thing is that there's always just this deep drive into, again, provide an environment for kids who just learn differently. Because there was always this gap in my head. Like I met all these very successful people with an ADHD or with a dyslexia or something, right? Whether they're on the spectrum, you meet all these very successful people, but like you struggle so much in school. So there's this huge gap in my head around how we could keep developing some kids who just had all this potential in the world, but we weren't doing it. And so I think it was just trying to fill that gap somewhere.
And it definitely, um, I think it's only recent that we realize that the brain can look and work differently. You know, you and I've talked, and my son has ADHD. My husband had ADHD, although it was never diagnosed. You know, and in that era, it wasn't. We didn't even have a name for it. And I've often had my son say, "Well, you know, my brain is working this way," and just to hear him explain how his brain works different adds so much understanding to me as an educator and a parent. So what are some of the differences that what does the research say in terms of how the brain works? What's some of the neuroscience?
Yeah, well, I mean, and it's always hard because each brain works so differently, right? So when a parent or a teacher says something along the lines of, "Well, I don't know how to tell my kid how to study," well, there's no like one answer that I can give you. The correct answer is, like let's say a kid gets a B on a Spanish test. As parents and as mentors, our conversations like, "I'm so proud of you for getting that B." Well, I know we coach people on it's the conversation is, "I'm so proud of you for getting that B. What did you do to study for that test? How many days in advance did you start studying? Were you sitting still or were you walking around while you were trying to retain that information? Was it on audio? Were you in a small group?" And so when we're asking all these questions, over time we'll start to see patterns. And the ADHD brain really struggles with what's called metacognition. That's just a fancy word for self-assessment. We don't know how we learned when we're younger, and we don't know how to reverse engineer success. So I guess that would be to answer your question, that'd be it's just one deficit that we have that if we do a good job as educators, coaches, mentors, we can really develop that part of the brain. But there's so many differences, whether it's attention, whether it's focus, organization, other components we could go down if you wanted to.
Well, definitely. What you're describing is what now we often talk about as executive function. So, is there a definition? Is that what the definition is for executive function?
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for bringing that back around. So, the my favorite definition of executive function, which is actually my expertise, is what we work on. So, executive functioning is just helping you reach your goal. So it's in the prefrontal cortex. It's all the processes that need to happen so you reach your end goal. So your goal may be something big, like making the varsity soccer team or getting into the college of your dreams. It's like your executive function skills reverse engineer that into daily actions to help you reach that end goal. But your executive function skills could also help you reach a small goal, like paying attention, getting out the door on time, um, writing your essay. It's like it's reversing all these things that need to be done for you to reach your goal. And so it comprises organization, working memory, metacognition, attention, focus, verbal skills, impulse control. So it encompasses a bunch of different things, but that's basically what it's doing is helping you reach your goals.
And that's something we all need, right? And it's
Yeah,
something
yeah
we
and
all would benefit from.
the thing I love about when you talk about working with neurodiverse kids, right? What's best practice for everybody is just essential for our kids. So whether we're talking about movement, getting your sleep, getting, studying several days in advance so we can get that material from short-term to long-term memory, well, breaking out my studying into manageable chunks days in advance or my essay or whatever, that's essential for me because my attention is poor. But that's best practice for everybody. So that's the great things is that, we're not we're not getting too far off track with a lot of our strategies.
Mm-hmm. So, how did you find the connection between that executive functioning and movement?
Yeah. So I guess so. My quick background is I left Colorado. I went out to Ohio on a football scholarship and just bombed out. Couldn't manage my academic with my athletic, with my social, and everything that your executive function skills are really the basis for you being successful when you step foot on campus. When you're going from a very structured home environment to an unstructured college campus, even with athletics, it's your executive function skills that if they aren't strong, you're going to struggle. So that was my path. And then throughout your path, I started to ask for mentorship and things, and you start to learn. I mean, I guess all of us here have figured out ways that we feel better and seem to work, even though you can't put your finger on it. And movement was always that piece for me. So my reading is very poor, but I have graduate degrees. I'm constantly walking around the block, devouring things on audio. So I always knew that. And then the book Spark by Dr. John Rady came out, um, talking about what is the neuroscience behind movement. So 15 minutes of intense exercise for kids is performing better than Adderall right now in clinical studies for learning, memory, retention, and attention. We're talking about decreases of anxiety. We're trying to turn off, that amygdala, that anxious part of our brain. And movement is a phenomenal way to do that. Especially if you're built like me, it's kind of essential.
It is. And understanding that connection and being able to harness it and use it in a way that's productive can be so monumental and make such impact. You and I were talking. I remember my son, when he'd come home from school, the last thing he'd want to do after spending all day trying to focus and pay attention in school was to do homework. And so he'd come home and jump on the trampoline. And I
I
mentioned
love
this
that.
to him the other
Yeah, I
day,
love that.
and he's
I love it.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, that was his elixir. So finding those different movements and you said 15 minutes a day.
So his research, the research out of Harvard, so he's a Harvard guy. The research out of Harvard says 15 minutes at 75% of your heart rate or above. Now, we don't expect people to put on heart rate monitors or anything like that, but essentially it's just 15 minutes of intense movement and your learning, memory, attention, retention. It just seems to go better. Um, I need more. That's just more of a general rule. Like it depends person to person, but you
Mhm.
know, one of the things we see, especially working with college students and collegiate consultants, is we do all this hard work and they step foot on campus. And even if they want to just thrive, they kind of forget this component. Goal is to help them learn more efficiently, get things for long term memory, sleep better, all these other things that we want. It's a central component of that. And I think a lot of times, as parents, mentors, coaches, we forget to relay that information to our students when they leave us.
Well, and I have one of my soapboxes that I'm on right now, and those of you that have been in my UCLA class have heard me talk about this, is like we do need to include transition. We're not here just to help students go from high school to college. I tell my students, I don't want you to graduate. I don't want to just get you out of high school. I want to get you into college. And I actually work with students through their freshman year for
Awesome.
that reason, so that they have a successful transition because they aren't set up to succeed. So, what are some things that you've found that can help them do that transition more successfully?
Yeah, well, and so much of this is through messaging, right?
Mm.
It's like if I tell a kid, you know, now that I'm pushing 40, if I tell a student to do something, they're not going to do it, right? Like with this old guy, I don't need to do that thing. But the way we've phrased it that's really been helpful is the Navy SEALs have a mentality. It's the discipline equals freedom mentality, right? Made famous by Jocko Willink, but they believe that if you want to achieve freedom, the only path through that is discipline. Well, movement's a huge component of that, right? Like if you move, your learning becomes more efficient. You can pay attention better. You're going to spend less time studying because of this movement, right? And we phrase a ton of stuff like this, boot neurodiverse kids, like 30 minutes with your professor or TA during office hours, that's going to save you an hour and a half to 2 hours on the back end if you have an executive function deficit by the time I initiate the task, figure out what to study, maintain attention. All this free time opens up for our kids to actually enjoy campus. And that's really what we're after is this freedom. And that's something that's landed really well if anybody wants to use it.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And they really can connect to that and understand that. So you talked about an executive functioning pyramid. Can you explain what that is? And I'll put that in our show notes, but so that people can actually see it. But explain what the executive functioning pyramid is.
Yeah, yeah. So this is always something that lands really well with like consultants and counselors and teachers and parents hate this conversation. That's okay. So when you look at the research on what really helps executive function skills, right? We're talking like the bottom of the pyramid. What gives you most bang for your buck? It's movement, it's sleep. In neuroscience right now, we can't tell if a kid has ADHD or they're so sleep deprived because they present the same way with
Mm.
lack of attention and inability to, to learn certain things. Sleep deprivation and ADHD present very similar. So exercise, sleep, structure, and routines. If we have those, we're going to do very well with our executive function skills. But then you can move up like organizational strategies. And at the top of the pyramid, that's things like accommodations. If they're not in college yet, like IEPs, 504s, things like that. That's where most people want to jump to. Parents get an evaluation, get a diagnosis. They want to go right to the top and focus on all these accommodations. Well, those can be helpful, very helpful. But you could have given me all the extra time in the world my college freshman year and things would have never gotten done, right? It's like you have to focus on the bottom to get you the most bang for your buck as you move up.
So you have to get enough sleep and move, and before you can, get into those executive functioning higher level things. And so how
Yeah.
do we do that? How do we do that as counselors or as parents?
Well, the way, so first of all, the mentalities really help. So that disciples freedom thing works because it doesn't matter if you want more freedom to join a Greek life, if you want to join clubs, if you want more time to play Minecraft without this anxious voice in the back of your head telling you didn't finish the paper. Like all of us are after freedom, so that helped. Um, and there's other mindsets we can get down to as well if you like, but um, I also just like to give the kids research too because then it's not my word versus them. It's just like I want you to be happy and healthy in college, and I want you to have a great college experience. Here's the research on what getting 8 hours of sleep is. Here's this. Um, that's tend to work really well.
That makes sense. And the more you engage the student in learning about themselves and finding, doing that research, the more they're going to apply it to themselves and retain it. What are other things that the research shows? And what are some of the research that you're involved in right now?
Yeah. So, I guess zooming out big picture, when we talk about that structure piece, that's where I'm so passionate about helping kids with this transition because it really is the biggest transition in a lot of our lives. Like when we go from college to professional, like we've been independent somewhat, and like there's stair stepping up, hard transitions, but this is a massive transition that so many of us struggle with. So integrating structure in some capacity, and we all do this, but I'm not sure sometimes we don't explain it correctly to students. Um, you know, one of the biggest indicators of academic success and retention for students with executive function challenges is are they involved? So whether that's in clubs, sports, something else, this structure piece is massive. And then the routines piece is massive as well. So an example of a routine is if you have an executive function deficit, life has got to be incredibly routine based. So I have a bowl when you walk in the door, my wallet, my keys, my phone land there. It's my landing pad. And then morning I scoop and I launch. That's my launching pad. I'm not blaming everyone in my house because I lost my keys anymore. I don't start the day an anxious wreck. Like I had a challenge and I built a routine around it. That's a lot of the conversations that we have with kids. So office hours is a routine. Research shows us same time, same place, whenever possible. No matter how poor your attention is, you'll get really good at focusing. So an example of this is if we're working with a kid in Colorado that goes off to California, what is that space on campus? Let's say it's 12 to 1 at the library every single day. We're there doing something and we're using that for productivity and productivity only. Or is it 5 to 6 at the coffee shop? Or what is that time we carve out? We stick to it. And if we're disciplined enough not to check our phone or get on email or anything else, your attention will be on fire. And very quickly you will learn and retain at a high level. So building in routines around challenges is very, very helpful.
And how do you help people? Like, if I have that routine, then how do I help people around me understand that that's important to me?
What a good question that is. I don't think I've received that one. Um, well, here's what we do, right? So I know one of the things I'm passionate about is that kids who are quote unquote good at doing school,
Mm-hmm.
they have skills that they just intuitively get that the rest of us don't get, right? So many people are like, you got to talk to your teacher, you got to talk to your professor, you got to advocate this, and this. And nobody teaches you how to advocate. So we role play with our students all the time. It's like, okay, how do you walk up to a professor with your shoulders back, your head high, look them in the eye, and clearly communicate for what you need? Role play that. Something a college consultant can do is how do you clearly advocate through an email and then just stick that in their draft inbox somewhere so they can just cut and paste it and reformat it, but giving them the tools to be successful. So I think with your question, it's almost just like role playing it once or twice.
Mm-hmm.
The
Mm-hmm.
first couple of times are rough, but then they got it right, and then that skill transfers to many other situations.
Yeah, because I know in conversations with students, like, well, I've been invited to go do this, or I've been invited to go do that. I know I should be studying or something. And I see the value of having that routine. And then as you move forward, people can see and realize, oh no, that's your dedicated time. But you have to role play to be able to stick to your guns and say, here's my, I'm going to go here. I really like to go do this with you, but it'll be another time or another date or something like that.
That's a great point. And then also, if possible, if you are still working with them like freshman year, the if you have an executive function challenge, you have lower than typical amounts of dopamine in your frontal lobe. We can talk about how that's a huge challenge and a huge gift if you like. But one of the things that works so well for our kids is positive reinforcement. Typical kid with ADHD gets 20,000 more negative comments than positive comments by the age of 10, then it goes up exponentially from there. But if your student actually sets those boundaries and sticks to them, and we can give positive reinforcement, giving dopamine to the dopamine deficient brain. So our model is 2 pats on the back, 1 kick in the tail. Love, love, accountability. We try to get there. During October and February, I know I don't get there. Like one positive comment every like 3 negative comments is great for me. But you're trying to get to that 2-to-1 positive to negative, and that really reinforces that behavior.
Well, so then that leads me to the question, and this goes back to the advocate. So often as students are in K-12, they do have the IEPs, as you mentioned, 504s, and their parents are the main advocates. And sometimes the students do learn how to be their own advocates, but they haven't had to. And it's hard for parents to back down on that. And then they run into a problem when their kids go to college because they want to continue in that role. So do you ever help students do a role play about how they create those boundaries for parents too?
Should that's a that's a great idea. So much of what we're talking about, zooming out really quick, is teams and systems for a consistent challenge. If there's a consistent challenge in my life, I need to build a routine, one routine only around that. I need to
Mm-hmm.
develop that routine, reinforce it. The brain is electricity. Electricity flows down the path of least resistance. Develop a routine, and then we're good. We have those skills, right? But the constant, you know, thing I hear from adults is like, well, this kid should. This kid should. It's like, well, they don't. Let's build a routine. Let's role play. Let's build a system. Let's automate it. Let's move on to the next challenge. That's kind of how we think about it. Is what's that constant challenge there?
Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit more about the dopamine and that research. I've not heard that, so you've got me interested in that aspect.
So when you look at the World Jobs Report, the new one just came out for 2027. So these kids that are going to college now, when they graduate, what is the world looking for? What are employers looking for? Obviously, your industry is being rocked by this AI thing, but
Mm-hmm.
anything that can be automated will be automated. So what the world is looking for is people who look at problems differently, people who see the world in a different way can attack challenges differently. These neurodiverse kids are like the fact that they have these different makeups have the potential to be some of the most sought after people. So that's the framework of all this for me. And that's where the passion lies. It doesn't matter though if you can't get anything done. If you can't discipline your gift, forget about it. Right. So if you don't have systems, routines built in, but these students have a ton of potential. How the dopamine plays out is that with these dopamine levels, if we find something not interesting, then we have twice as challenging of a time engaging in that. And I think you and I see this all the time, whether it's a monotonous something that they find monotonous, we have twice as hard time engaging. Where the gift lies is this hyper focus thing. So if we do find something engaging, we get in twice as deep to it. Like we're the type of people, If we find, I don't know, video games interesting, like we will stay in that for hours upon hours and forget to eat, things like that. Well, the real world rewards people who get in deep on one thing and become really good at one thing, and school rewards being a generalist.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the research on the dopamine levels, and that's why that hyper focus. When you look at so many people who are successful with this deficit, you're kind of like, how does it happen? That's a component of how it happens, is this ability to hyper focus on what we really care about.
So it sounds like these routines that students set up and start high school or set up in college can then continue on once they go into the workforce.
It's all transferable. That's again, this is through the lens of school. It's not about school. You teach a kid to advocate, you're teaching them how to talk to the professor, but you're also teaching them how to have that hard conversation with a boss, a spouse, how to interview for a job. Like, that's the goal here. It's done through the lens of school, but we are covertly tricking them into being functional and happy and healthy human beings.
And that is having that broader perspective and looking at things outside the box, I think, is very invigorating. Again, looking at my experience as a parent, my son, like when he was in elementary school and we were doing spelling words, you do write the word 10 times, and then he'd go take the test and bomb it. Well, he knew the words because we'd gone over them. And so we went to a learning specialist, and she had him doing things in sand, had us write on his back, and she had him spelling words I never thought he would work. We threw out the whole 10, write the words down 10 times. I think I threw that out in second grade, and we did hangman, and we did crossword puzzles, and we did all sorts of different ways. And he turned into a phenomenal writer, and creative. He's a creative writer, and he has a phenomenal imagination that he's always kept, even as an adult. So sometimes you just have to throw out the norm and find something new and creative to help. So what are some things examples of things that your students have done to create those routines or functions to help themselves that might be unique?
Do you mean like for learning? Because that's a great story. So like for learning, so I kind of spoke to it, but I read at like a third grade level. Like my attention is so poor, but I have graduate degrees, and so I have a system for myself where I'm constantly walking around the block, like the neighborhood watch guy is like watching me closely. He's like, "This is the day. This guy's up to something," and I'm just trying to read. And I stop every 10 minutes and write down what I need to. And here's the hard thing for a lot of parents and teachers and kids. It's like they think the way to read is to sit still and be quiet and read.
Right.
That's
Mm-hmm.
There's no good or bad way. Like reading the word 10 times isn't better than using sand. It's well as how do you retain the information? It's a lifelong gift. So that's one example for our younger kids. We have kids on the trampoline here, doing if they have some kind of dyscalculia or something, do application facts, throw the football while studying words. Just how do you engage the child, and how do you give them the gift of self-assessment? Because a lot of times we'll put a kid on a trampoline to learn multiplication. It's even worse than sitting still, and it's not good or bad. We're just trying to find that path so they figure out how they acquire and retain information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and what about learning this as an adult? Sometimes students are able to, or even in high school, we see this a lot too. They're able to manage through elementary school, and then they get, say, to honors classes or AP classes, and all of a sudden they hit a wall, and all of a sudden the ways they used to do things or the ways they suddenly have to study or learn how to study in a different way. So that sometimes their difficulties can be masked until they get older.
This is, I spoke about like the best type of ADHD is this is something that you and I experience all the time. We call it, the twice exceptional student. It's kind of the
Mm-hmm.
epitome of it. There's not a gifted bone in my body, and I never experienced this because I struggled throughout the whole process. But we see kids all the time, especially with this inattentive ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
And what's just come across my radar a lot recently is a very kind, intelligent, just people. just kind, intelligent people who they didn't notice it until like freshman year of college. And then we get the double meltdown, which is really hard. It's they don't know how to study, they don't know how to systematize their life. But then also they've always identified as being the smartest person in the room and usually have. They get to an
Mhm.
elite school, we have this double meltdown occur because they're not the smartest person, they don't know how to study. So we have to just go back to step one. I feel like it's like very remedial, but it's just teaching them how to study and how they learn. So that twice exceptional kid is something you and I see just at scale in the masses, and there is a path, but it can be hard at that stage.
So, what are some of the other things that you do with your students as part of your untapped learning?
Well, I mean, so we focus primarily on executive function coaching. So we meet with our college kids, for example, twice per week. So let's say they're off at University of California, meet with them on Sunday or Monday and get a very clear list for the week. Because when you have this difficulty, especially providing that structure, but when you have this difficulty, we struggle with gray. So everything needs to be black and white. So they have a research paper on due Friday. How do we reverse engineer that? So we do that Sunday or Monday, spend 30 minutes going through everything, getting them a very clear to-do list, role playing how to talk to professors if that's on the list, which office hours to go to, how to prepare that, just teaching them how to be a kid, a successful student. And then we meet with them again on Thursday or Friday to provide that quick feedback loop because we found like Monday to Monday is just too long. We need that quick feedback slash problem solving. That's when we do our accountability. Again, providing that structure, that two pats in the back, one kick in the tail, problem solving anything that went wrong, extra academic help. So we could come at it pretty intensive. And I'm not sure how that would format for other people here, but hopefully it gives you a few ideas on how we can give these quick feedback loops, whether it's automated through an automatic email, student reads their email or a text message or whatever. Hopefully there's something you can.
Definitely. Yeah, that's very helpful. And again, going back to what you were talking about in terms of, all people versus, we all can benefit from that. That's something that everybody can benefit, but it's essential for students who are neurodivergent. Now, you just did a webinar not too long ago, and you had an article published in the magazine Attitude. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, no, it was just it was a lot of what we're talking about now, just going into further detail, right? If someone's really interested about really diving into the research on whether it's movement, whether and if there's educators too, like how to set up your classroom
Mm-hmm.
in a way that can really help kids with executive function skills. One of the things really working with professors on is how do they organize their Canvas, their DTLL, their Google Classroom? How do they hyperlink scripts in there instead of complaining about my kids are disrespectful? Like hyperlinking a script into your syllabus so it shoots out to like here's how to talk to me, here's how to advocate. It goes into a lot of detail on things like that, but it's all done through this discipline equals freedom, and then also the lead domino mindset, which is what you and I talked about. It's when there's a lot of things that are a challenge. You're going to a new environment, a lot of things are new.
Mm-hmm.
What is one routine we can build that will help us with 5, 10, 15 other things? So an example is a 15-minute exercise routine. Learn better. We don't feel like eating like garbage. We sleep better. We feel better. We're more self-confident. Like all these things happen from this one routine. Um, there's a lot of things we can do, whether as teachers, as consultants. Like it's a hard question a lot of times, but there's always one thing we can do to improve a lot of other things. So that's a lot of what that webinar is about as well.
Oh, that sounds great. Well, and I'll definitely put that in the show notes. And I'm interested in listening because as an instructor, all online, through UCLA, I want to make sure I'm making things that I do accessible. And that's one of the reasons I have a different approach and I use these interviews as part of my UCLA program because I know everybody's reading and it gives to be able to listen gives them an alternative way to learn. So
Can I stop you on that real quick? Because I've
mhm.
always been a huge fan of what you've done. And a lot of us are having these conversations professionally. But like your lead domino, and I'm guessing here, so correct me if I'm wrong, but just videotaping, that's such an old word. Recording these and putting these out there. I'm guessing that simple act has probably improved a lot of things for you. Well, it's probably improved your networking, how to talk to parents. You can just send them a quick link, and you're probably saving so much time on the back end through this one thing. Um, this is a question I'm always struggling with: is what in my life, what one thing can I do to make it easier? It's been a very helpful mindset for me, and sleep, exercise. There's some very easy ones, but as you get into it, like it's a hard question, but it's a valuable question.
It is. It is. And I think that's an important question. And different times of our lives, as you're going through different stages, those answers may change a little bit. And so asking that question over and over again can be part of it. But one thing you mentioned, I think is so key, is the mindset. We need to have that mindset of being open and exploring and looking for those opportunities. How do you teach that to students? How do you help them have that open mindset?
That's a great question. Just real quickly, I want to give two more ridiculous examples of the lead domino.
Mm-hmm.
So like we worked with a professor and we helped a professor. The completion rate in his class was not great. And we just switched all of the assignments due at the exact same time on the exact same day. So like all discussion posts were Tuesday at 11:59, and then all projects were due Friday at 11:59 because he had different project dates that one thing improved assignment completion by like 25%. So there's less chasing emails, there's less all these other things, right? Another ridiculous example is when I had like 20 ADHD kids in my seventh period class when I was a middle school teacher, eighth graders, right? There were
Middle school
so
teacher.
many challenges, right?
Uh,
The one thing I did is I had to discipline myself to stand in front of my door, teach my kids how to walk in my room and greet each one of them, like looking them eye to eye and asking. That one thing saved me so many behavior challenges. I wasn't starting the class anxious, like teaching them how to enter my classroom. It sounds so ridiculous, saved me so much time, effort, and my voice. Right. So there's a few more ridiculous examples that are hopefully helpful. With students, explaining to them that this will open up freedom in their life without people nagging them and being on their tail, building in the positive reinforcement, and then modeling it. One of the hard things I have is that students watch what we do, not necessarily, listen to what we say. So when I lose my keys around the office, which it happens all the time, they're watching that. And I can't tell them about the importance of routines if I'm not going to stick to that. And that's always a challenge for me.
that makes sense. That makes sense. And that, yeah, it's, not do as I say, but do as I do. So we have to implement those in our lives. So I'm very
And
interested.
and then the intention behind it, like you don't need to be perfect, but just they see you trying, they see you struggling, and they're like, okay, like I can I can try to.
Well, and then they understand they see you're struggling too, and implementing. Then they realize that you're not perfect, and therefore they don't have to be perfect. So that makes. I'm interested in some other dominoes that you have.
They're so personal. It's such a hard question. This is my driving question. Whenever whenever I drive, I'm like, okay, your life's on fire again. You you have all these different fires going on. What is one thing you can do today? Um, so yeah, that's what I do. And the other hard thing too is having empathy with yourself when things don't go to plan. Because a lot of times, like sleep has always been my biggest ADHD challenge. My mind will not just turn off, it just goes. Last night I didn't sleep well because I was on my phone right before bed. I had to send out three more emails, and like I have to have some empathy with myself and saying tonight will be a new night. But having a sleep routine is essential. Um, that's a great domino. Um, yeah. Breaking down skills that students don't know how to do, and like teaching them how to study is a great lead domino. One of the things for our anxious students, because we're doing a ton of work with anxiety, is like if they have like a really hard, like let's say it's like a calculus class where they have like a chapter over three tests. A lot of our perfectionist students trying to get into the Ivy League schools, they will study for so long and just become more and more anxious because they don't know when to end. So
Mhm.
giving them a task like, okay, there's three chapters of this calc. You can use a note card or you can use a study sheet because then they have a beginning and ending. And if the brain has all this information and they synthesize it onto one thing, well, they've learned it. So we know they've learned it, but giving them a beginning and an end point has been a lead domino that's helped us with anxiety.
Oh, well, yeah. Yeah, I can see that. We have to apply those same kind of principles for students writing their essays. At some point, it's enough. You have to call it done.
Yeah.
As some students want to keep going on and on and on. It's like it's not perfect yet, and how giving them those tasks and having an end point. It's like it has to be done by this time. Is
Well,
awesome.
and hopefully for people here, if you are a college consultant, you have that type of student. It's like, what is one thing you can implement? Because my goal is student mental health will open up, and but also like you'll get less emails from parents, you'll have less
Mm-hmm.
of these conversations. Like those, all of us have impossible jobs here,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you're in education, any capacity, you have an impossible job. How do we that one or two things to open up some freedom?
Well, let's go back to the topic of mental health because that is such a big issue right now. And it sounds like these routines and mindset is something that student that can help their mental health as well.
Significantly. Yeah. Well, I mean, we do a lot of work with therapists because when you look at mental health, they're coming from the top down. We're kind of coming from the bottom up, right? It's like a lot of us are anxious just because we can't get anything done. So, like, what is that productivity? What are these systems we can implement? Because it does open a lot of mental freedom. The
Mm-hmm.
simple act of going to an office hours and not putting it off or condensing it down like, opens up a lot of mental clarity. So, yeah, there's significant data to show routines decrease stress and anxiety for that cortisol and really increase productivity and attention.
So it sounds like some of those things might then replace medication that oftentimes students are put on.
I mean, they could. Yeah, yeah. We do a lot of work with psychiatrists, but I'm not a psychiatrist myself. We have a psychiatrist on our board. Because I do get that question a lot, especially
Mm-hmm.
with ADHD medication and things like that. And that's such a personal decision.
Mm-hmm.
But how I explain it is that, people think like whether it's ADHD medication or an antidepressant, that that's going to fix everything.
Right.
And, it's weirdly enough, ADHD medication has this thing where people think it's going to fix everything. Like we all know it logically, like framed through a different lens. I can't be like, if I take this antidepressant, I'm going to have a improved relationship with my mother. It's like, that's ridiculous. I don't have mom issues. My mom's phenomenal. But like, just like as an example, we have that mentality for ADHD medication. It's a great tool that will increase, let's say like 80% functioning to 90, 95, depending on how you want to measure it. But you still have to have these systems in your life, these structures, routines, habits, sleep, exercise, or it's just not going to be that effective.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, yeah. And you point to that you can't rely on just one thing. As you said, the pill's not going to fix everything. You have to have everything in place. And it is an individual journey for each student and the family too. So
Yeah, and to answer your question, it could decrease medication, or
mm-hmm.
it could just make it more effective. Or it all depends on the medication. But the goal, no matter what medicated or not, is to have a healthy, productive lifestyle where our students know what's expected of them. Because that's where so much of this anxiety comes from. Is we just don't know how to get to from beginning to end.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, what would be one piece of advice you'd like for college counselors, advisors to know, Brandon?
I'm going to morph this question. I I
Go
I
for
I,
it.
I,
Go
I
for it.
apologize. I apologize. The two most research-based things we can do, most bang for your buck that are concrete, are routine implementation, which I talked about, and planning. So like teaching a student how to plan out their week or something like that. Planning looks different for everybody, but um, some kind of work or discussion around that throughout the process is going to give you a lot of bang for your buck. So routines and planning are kind of the two big things here. That those would be my humble pieces of advice.
Well, and I think especially as college advisors, I mean, our whole world and our whole roles revolve around that. And we may be setting that up for our students, not knowing that's what we're doing, but doing it on a more deliberate basis, having a structure and communicating that. I think uh, include, because we have to plan or they won't get their applications in time. And so, but having a way to do that and communicate that, I think, is really good advice.
And what is their organizational system, and helping them build that plan into that, right? Is it a plan? Is it Google Calendar with reminders? Like, what is it? Because the amount of kids we see who step foot on campus who don't have an organizational system yet is
Mm-hmm.
darn near close to 100%. And of course, that's my life and that's my specialty. But so the numbers aren't that high. But there are many, many kids who they just haven't taken the plan we've created and put that in their own system. So, what is that system? There's no right or wrong system here. What is that system that's going to help them be successful?
So, well, that, I mean, oftentimes I find one of the questions I ask students early on is how they keep a calendar. Do you
Right?
keep an electronic calendar? Do you put things in your phone? And oftentimes they're like, oh, I just remember it. Well, at some point, you're not just going to remember it. And so having a way to, so are those some of the steps that you walk students through in terms of, because I think being able to write down things and do that backward mapping using a calendar, are they all using electronic calendars? Is that what you recommend, or is it better to go the old fashioned paper calendar?
It all depends on the person. So the right organizational system is the organizational system that you update daily. For us, it doesn't matter. It just you have to update it daily. Um, and that's where a lot of the accountability stuff that we do comes into play. But to piggyback on something you said that was so important. So there's a lot of research around like brain dumping, and I don't remember where it's from. I apologize, but like simply like getting out everything out of your brain, getting it on a whiteboard, like a huge whiteboard, just getting everything out. What we're finding is the brain is for having ideas and not holding them. Everything you hold in your brain is going to increase anxiety. Simply getting it out onto something is hugely helpful for anxiety. That's hard with a lot of our defensive kids because that's how they don't want to change until they get to a point where they have to, and we know they're going to have to sooner than later. But when that window opens, it's great to have that conversation.
So do you teach students how to do journaling? And I know gratitude journaling is, you know, um, something that adults and others are teaching, and there's research on the benefits of that. Brene Brown and others do that. So is that another aspect as part of that dumping is having the journaling?
That's good questions. We don't teach that just because that's not in the executive function realm, but I can speak personally. Having a gratitude practice was a lead domino for me. I heard Brene Brown and others speak to the fact that over time it would, change your brain. And I noticed that too, that I just saw things differently. This has nothing to do with executive function, but that was helpful for me. One of the first things we do is we have big, huge whiteboards here. It's just getting kids in and having them get everything out of their brain that they have to do. There's no right answer. There's no wrong answer. It's just like standing in front of that board and just writing down everything that has to be done. Just get your basketball shoes, get this paper in the lawn mode. And like, you just see like their shoulders like drop, like they've been holding all this trying to remember it. And that's exhausting and hard on your mental health.
Well,
But they all want to do it. They all want to do it. So
yeah. Yeah, they do. They do. Well, and I'm reflecting back on my work through AVID, which is a program that's in the schools. It was started here in California. It's advancement via individual determination. And we taught a lot of those executive functioning, or still, AVID's still going on, but teaching students how to keep a calendar, how to take Cornell notes, and not just write down what teachers say, but really reflect on it and what does it mean to you and how do you synthesize it and process it in a way that's meaningful to you, and really teach them how to be students. Use the Socratic method for tutoring. It's not the traditional, okay, I'm the tutor, I'm giving you all the answers. The students have to come up with the questions themselves and then together come up with the answers. And the role of the tutor is just to guide that conversation. So
Yeah, no, I taught a little bit of Avid as well, and that's great. The only thing I would slightly switch about is sometimes they had us do like worksheets on like how to fill out a planner. If our students, especially with this hard time task initiation on things they don't find like so like interesting, is just making it with their own life and then giving them positive feedback for that instead of like if they have to do a worksheet or something they don't that's like it seems like an extra thing to them unless it's their own life, so being unbelievably concrete with it like here is your life, then they really engaged.
that, yeah. And that's the theme, that the thread that's tying everything together is that concreteness of what you're doing and what you're asking students, right?
The frontal lobe apertures, I think, depends, obviously it's so dependent on the kid, but if you do have an executive function deficit like an ADHD, it's like 2 to 5 years behind the quote unquote typical students, right? That's why we see some immaturity and some other things. And I think it catches up. But just in this stage of life, um, in this adolescent 17 to or 16 to like 21, it's just a few years behind. I know I always have a hard time because we've started working with like very high level athletes, right? So you'll get this kid
Mm-hmm.
who's like 6'8", 6'9", he's like a grown man with like a beard, and it's like like organizationally, not intelligence, has nothing to do with intelligence, but organizationally, we're at like a 13 or 14-year-old level here. And so I have to constantly reframe my mindset because they don't look the part, but they're just struggling with that piece. And
Yeah,
it'll catch up. It'll catch up, but
yeah,
with the
yeah.
right work. Like it has nothing to do with intelligence.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's one of the key things that we need to remember and remind people that we work with, and parents and others and teachers and educators, that it has nothing to do with intelligence. They're two separate. So Brandon, thank you so much. This is a topic we could spend hours on, and I already have all sorts of other questions that I could ask you, but I know we have a limited amount of time. If somebody wants to reach you or has other questions, how do they do that?
The easiest way is untappedlearning.com. And then a lot of questions around this can be sensitive. So my email is just bslade. You guys can put this in the show notes, I'm sure, but bslade at untappedlearning.com. Um, yeah, no. And so I can help. Just know. Be huge, huge fans of these students. They're exhausting. They're a pain in the tail. They drive you crazy, and they're the ones who can be the game changers.
They absolutely can. They absolutely can, and we're seeing that. I think more and more, and so thank you for being that advocate that you are, and helping us to support them as well. So everybody, I hope you all have a great Labor Day weekend. And Brandon, thank you for joining us on the
Yeah.
beginning of your holiday. We won't have a Friday forum next week, but we're coming back on September 15th, I believe. That's when Brad Schiller from Prompt is going to join us. And we're going to go into that topic of AI and college essays. It's an encore. He spoke last spring, and now we're going to revisit that and see where things are at. There's always so much conversation about that. And other sessions that we're going to be doing September, I have some workshops coming up. So check my website and you can see the essay writing on Untapped. No, I have Untapped. It's essay in a box
Thank you for the plug.
workshop.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I've structured that, and I've been doing this for students for years, but many of the things that you talk about, I did through this workshop to just help scaffold and scale and give students the tools and resources. And like in my class, and I know many UCLA instructors do it too. I have all my assignments due the same day of the
Love
week
it.
at the same
Love it.
time. Everything, discussions, assignments are always due on Mondays by midnight, California time. So everybody knows that that's their due date. So I found that
Love
very
it.
interesting that makes a difference.
We, I don't want to take any more time, but we have this weird hide and go seek guessing now when things are due. The goal is to learn the material, right? And the great educators like a lot get things intuitively. And the fun thing about my field now is now we're starting to get research to back things up. But a lot
Mm-hmm.
of great educators have already gotten this stuff intuitively. Now we're finally starting to be like, okay, here's the data we can point to.
Yeah. And that's the key. That's a very key. So, all right. Well, thanks again, Brandon. Carmen, thank you for being here. Everybody, thank you for being here. I hope your application seasons and such are going well. And we hope to see you back here in a couple of weeks.